Hello, and welcome to the Wandering Creatives podcast. I'm your host, Allie, and joining me today is Lucy Kelly, founder of Belle Monili and Bloom. She is also an artist and coach. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Allie. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Likewise, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. I'm gonna fangirl a little bit here. I'm a huge fan of everything you do as part of Bloom. I'm in your Facebook group. I get your newsletter, the resources, the tools, like everything that you provide for creatives is insanely useful. So yeah, I'm super excited to have you on the podcast today.
Wow, well, that is high praise. Thank you so much. That really makes me feel good because my big goal is, everything that I do in Bloom is to help other handmade sellers because it's a weird little group we're in this business.
It really is. And like the craft market or craft fair and handmade maker community and all of that, it's an amazing group to be a part of, but it can be difficult, like getting set up and getting going. And that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate the type of resources and information that you put out there, because your goal as a coach, artist, and maker yourself is to really help other makers figure out how to be successful. And I mean,
Yep.
As a maker, I can really appreciate that.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm thrilled to hear that it is useful. It makes my heart feel good.
Yes, we need all the help we can get. I'm not only excited to talk more about what you do on like the coaching side, but also to learn about your journey from like you started off and still are a successful like handmade jewelry maker. And then you've kind of transitioned into this coaching field to help other sellers. And so I'm interested in kind of what that creative journey has been like for you, and can't wait to talk about that a little bit more. You started Belle Monili. I'm just going to tell you now. I'm probably going to mispronounce this throughout the entire podcast.
That's okay. Belle Monili, you got it.
Belle Monili. Okay. You started your business in 2010, or you started it as a hobby. And then, you started to go to craft shows, started to get in some markets. And then it really kind of like took off from there, right? Like tell us a little bit more about Belle Monili.
I did start in 2010. It's, kind of a long, convoluted story to how I became who I am. But essentially in 2010, I was looking for something to do to keep my hands busy. My boyfriend at the time was traveling a lot. He traveled in the summers. And I thought, well, it's the summer before I turn 30. I'm going to learn how to do some new things. I wanted to learn how to sew, and I wanted to learn how to quilt, and I wanted to take some jewelry making classes. So I did that, and I'm a terrible sewist. I am a terrible, I can't knit, I can't crochet, I can't sew, but jewelry, like the jewelry classes, that stuck, and I got it right away. And it was a lot of fun. I have been a tinkerer and a maker my entire life. So it was just the thing, I think most makers will agree that when you find your thing, it just feels so natural, like you always knew how to do it. And you just learned the ins and outs of it. So that was how I got started making, like the actual technical starting of getting making. And I thought, well, this is going to keep my hands busy and I'll be able to make some stuff and whatever, that'll be it. I'll be able to make gifts and that'll be cool. Except I wore, I literally went to a class at a craft store and I wore the necklace that I made. And like the next day, someone was like, oh, that's really awesome. Can I buy that? I was like, oh, wow. Like, you want to buy stuff? Like, holy cow, someone wants to buy something I made? Well, that's awesome. So I was like, well, yeah, I bought more of the same materials and made another one and sold it. I'm like, well, this could be really cool. And Etsy had just been around for a few years then. I actually started my first Etsy shop right then in 2010. And then I started a new one in 2011 because in 2010, I was just my name and not set up as a business. And it was just a place for people to sell. So I was like, yeah, this is going to be cool. This is going to work. And then I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are very fortunate here to have a really wonderful, rich art scene. We have a lot of opportunities for makers and artists, and the people here are very supportive of the handmade community. So as soon as I realized that people wanted, like people that weren't just my family, wanted to buy things that I made, I was like, well, man, I've got lots of opportunities to do shows. So I did my first craft show that summer of 2010. In the end of August, it was a group called the I Made It Market. That is a local group. She still does shows now. I do her shows every year. And I made $160 setting my stuff out on a little table. And I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, yeah, I'll take that $160 for some stuff I tinkered at home. That's fantastic. And it was there. My next show, I did a Christmas show. It was an I Made It Market Christmas show in November of 2010. And at that show, I made $900. And I was like, yeah, this is the thing I'm going to be doing. So that's how it all started.
Or you take kind of antique jewelry or just stuff you kind of find in various places and then kind of like zhuzh it up a bit and turn it into something beautiful. And
yeah, so that's what I do now. And when I first started, and again, I think every maker will kind of agree. If you're just starting, you don't know this yet, but it's true. You'll find it true that your work kind of evolves. Like what you start out making and what you end up making a few years down the road is usually very different. So I started just with, components that I would buy at the craft store. And my thing was different color combinations. And that's still what I'm known for is my unique color combinations and scale and things like that. But how I came to, I love vintage. I love flowers. I have a love for all things like mid-century. And it's kind of this interesting intersection between my personal life and just liking that. My grandmother had an antique shop when I was growing up, and it was just a couple of houses down from my house, which in retrospect was awesome. And she was my best friend. I would run down after school and she would let me help do her displays. And when she went to buy from people, she would take me with her. So I got to see kind of that end of it. And, this is probably like late 90s, well, mid 90s. She would do antique shows, which are very similar to craft shows now. They aren't as big as they used to be, but she would take us with her. So to me, like packing up the van and going to a show on a weekend was a totally regular thing. And there's an abundance of vintage costume jewelry out there. So I always appreciated it. But then as I got more into making jewelry, I had friends who would be like, hey, I have this old jewelry and like, I don't want to get rid of it, but can you do something with it? And you know what that's like, when you're a maker, like people give you all kinds of stuff and some of it you just have to accept graciously and pass on to the bin. And some of it you do stuff with. I loved reworking that stuff. I loved, taking these gaudy old beads and making it into something new because the transformation is so significant, but the story is still there. You know what I mean? So like if it's your grandmother's, funky old plastic pearls, they can have a completely different life in a whole new piece, but the story's still there. And so that's kind of how it evolved. And now that's what I do. I work exclusively with vintage costume jewelry. And then I use new beads and gemstones and things like that to pair up with it.
Absolutely love that. Like there are some times where I'm like, I'm not like a big jewelry wearer, but sometimes I wish I was. And this is one of those cases. I love the idea of being able to take something old and turning it into like giving it a little bit of a new life. But like you said, there's still that story there. I love it so much.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun. There's just, people will ask me some of the stuff that I make. Like I'm known really for my collage necklaces, and people will be like, oh, are they delicate? Like, will it break? And it's like, listen, this jewelry's been around for like 70 years. I think it's good. Like it's not going to break. It's hung in for a while.
They don't make jewelry like they used to. That stuff could withstand everything.
This episode of the Wandering Creatives podcast is sponsored by Coots Creations, branding and marketing for creatives by creatives. Coots Creations serves small businesses, entrepreneurs, and creatives throughout the country with branding, marketing, and social media management. We accomplish this by creating unique graphics, a cohesive visual brand, and content that tells your brand's story and builds trust with your customers. Visit cootscreations.com and book your free consultation today.
You started kind of building Belle Monili on Etsy in 2010 and then kind of revamped it in 2011 after you've been on Etsy for a little while and figured it out. And you've had like a lot of success as a seller, not only on Etsy, but also like through markets and selling on other platforms. And so much so to the point where you started making six figures in sales, which blows my mind. Like as a maker, I'm like, ooh, I'm lucky if I'm breaking even on like my booth fees, or like coming out on top on Etsy. So anytime someone, like I see something like that where you've been able to like really take your kind of passion and your hobby and turn it into a six-figure business, that's super impressive. And I just have to say, like, Congratulations on
Thank you.
like having such a successful business. It's absolutely amazing. Since you had such success, you started your own website and everything, but I guess I'm curious, how long did it take you to kind of reach that milestone of being able to like truly start making a good bit of sales?
Right. So I think my first official six-figure year was it was either 2016 or 2017. I'd have to look back at my numbers. And I want to make sure that I'm clear. Like I said, I'm always, I try to be clear and honest. Six-figure sales is a gross number. I do not have $100,000 plus sitting in my checking account. So it's always important to note that, like, yes, that is a gross sales number. And yes, I'm proud of it. And I share that number widely, but like, just to make sure everybody knows, when someone says that, they don't mean that's how much they have in their wallet. Because, and I'll circle back around to why that's relevant. We all, I think, start in this journey of figuring, we want to make, and then there's a catalyst that happens that we decide we're going to sell. Either someone wants to buy, or you make stuff and people are like, oh, you should sell that. That's really great. You should set up an Etsy shop. And then you do. And then, people start telling you about shows, and it's usually a church show or a school show or a local market. And then from there, we kind of all walk this path. Like, we set up at the shows where you sell one thing and it might be to your neighbor. And we sit out in the rain thinking, why, like, who signed off on this? Whose idea was this to sit out in the pouring rain or the snow or when it's 90 degrees outside? But what happens every time you do one of those events is you learn something. So even if you have no sales, you don't come away empty-handed because you've learned something. And what you learn is where your audience is and where your audience isn't. And that really is the key. And that's the core of what I teach in Bloom, not just to my students, but in my free community. Like, that's no secret. That is your key. If you can know who your customer is and where they go, you'll be good. You have to find out usually kind of where they don't go first. And that's just, I wish there was a faster way to do that. There's really not. I can't give my things away at a show that would happen in like my local church basement. However, I can go to a vintage market and have a line a mile long. And there are people that, it's vice versa for them. So that's a big part of it. So as I went through that journey of trying different markets, like for me, it's vintage markets and indie fairs. Those are my two places. But I had to go through other markets and test them and try them and see. And, people will say, well, this show is really fantastic. It's really wonderful. I love it. And then you come to find, well, they make $150 there. And that's a great show for them. And that doesn't disqualify that. But when someone says, oh, it's really a wonderful show, you need to quantify, what does that mean to you? Mm-hmm. And doesn't mean the same thing to me. To me, no, that does not mean the same thing. So then what happened was I started to fall into this niche of doing upcycled costume jewelry. And then I also started to move into these vintage shows. So the Country Living Magazine Fair and vintage, like barn sales and things like that. I started to find those. And that was when I really found my audience. That was when I found people that would come to my checkout with like arms full of necklaces, and they just like, they couldn't get enough of it. So then it was like, okay, this is my thing. This is where I'm supposed to be. These are my people. From there, at that point, so we're talking like 2014, 15, 16, my main selling platform was Etsy. Etsy it's a very low barrier of entry, meaning it's very easy to set up. People understand it. They started, I think, in 2005. So by that point, the general public kind of understood Etsy. They were comfortable shopping there. They knew to go there. So there were a lot of benefits, and still are a lot of benefits to being on there. I also started building my social media. So I'm old enough that when Facebook started, you had to join with a .edu email address. It was only for students.
You had to have the college. Yep. Same. I remember those days.
Yes, this was pre-Instagram, pre-Pinterest. This was actually, like you shifted from MySpace over to Facebook. That's when I started.
Same.
But then, so Facebook used to be just for students, and then it expanded to people, and then it expanded to businesses. So I started building my business. I created a Facebook page for my business in 2010. And that is where I really started to build traction. Now, this was in the days of someone could share your post and you could get 1,000 new likes in a day. This was pre-Facebook ads days. So that combined with having an Etsy shop really helped to strengthen my online presence. Again, it was a different scene then, but basically like I would post pictures of my work. Oh, where do you get that? And I would send them to my Etsy shop. And there is a tipping point, and this is true today as it is in any time for anybody. There's a tipping point where if you're sending the majority of your traffic to Etsy, then you're kind of giving money away, because Etsy is a platform, it's a marketplace. So you want to be pulling customers from there. But when you get to the point where more of the traffic is coming from your efforts, then at that point, it's worthwhile for you to create your own website, because at that point, you're driving the traffic and you're essentially giving a cut of it to Etsy. And that gets quite expensive. As you start to sell more and more, those Etsy fees get very expensive. And my monthly bills were starting to get high, which was great because that meant I was selling, but it was also like, wait a minute, I'm paying, $500 a month to Etsy. I could start my Shopify site for $30 a month and have people coming there. So that was the tipping point when I started to do the vintage shows and I started to connect with my real customers, and I started being able to expand a little bit. Like, again, at Country Living, I would sell maybe some antiques or some shirts or some like supplemental things. That was when I really saw that big growth and was able to tip it over into my own website and more of my own marketing and business, as opposed to relying on Etsy for the commerce part of it.
I find the whole Etsy versus your own website conversation really interesting, because it's something. So I've been doing markets for about a year now. So I'm still very much like trying to, like you were talking about, like I'm trying to figure out where my audience is still, like going from kind of building, for me right now, markets, it's about building relationships with people, like other makers, potential customers. So I may not be selling a lot, but I'm like getting my name out there and like starting conversations. And then there's always that question, like, do I send them to Etsy because people know Etsy and they're comfortable with it? There's like a little bit of a safety, I think, for folks on Etsy versus like a private website. And that's something that I struggle with. It's like, do you just do Etsy? Do you just do your own website? Do you do both? Have you seen like a benefit to selling on Etsy over your own site, or should makers be doing both until they can determine which one does better?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. So first and foremost, I'll give you this little tip and share it with anybody who doesn't know it. You should buy your domain name. Even if you want to have your own site, even if you don't have your domain name, meaning your business's website name, you can point that domain name to anywhere you want. So belmonili.com for years went to Etsy. Somebody who has my business card from 2011 that said belmonili.com, like now it goes to my Shopify site, but then it went to Etsy. So like, let's start there. Get your domain name, because what you want to do when you're meeting people at shows, you are building that relationship with your customers. You are establishing that consistency. So whether it be them going to your Etsy shop or them going to your website, you want to always be building your brand, because when someone buys something, I do still have my Etsy shop, the one that I opened in 2011. I do still have that shop and it is still active, and I will always keep it because it's more of a marketing channel at this point. But when someone buys something from my Etsy shop and their friend says, hey, that's really awesome, where'd you get that? The answer is, I got it on Etsy. Not, I got it from Belmonili. But if they got it from my website, the answer is, oh, I got it from Belmonili. That's a big difference. So the main differentiator in deciding where you want to start out for e-commerce for me is, do you have an audience? So do you have anyone on Facebook, on Instagram, any other socials? Do you have an email list? Do you have shows that you go to? Do you have a group of people who are interested in your things that are asking for a way to go and see them? If the answer is yes, then you want to be sending those people to your own website, because they've already seen you. They've already established that they're interested in your product. So like, yes, they want to go to your website. Now, you can't just have some janky website. You need to have like a good, like an e-commerce website. Fortunately, with platforms like Shopify and Wix and Weebly, it is very, very easy to have a very professional looking website without having to know how to code and do all that tech and everything. If you do not have an audience, if you are just starting from scratch, if you've got no idea like who would want to buy it from you, or no one has asked to shop from you online, but your product is good and there's a market for it somewhere, Etsy is going to be a better place for you, because they kind of come with an audience. Mm-hmm. Now, you are one of millions of shops on Etsy. Not that, website's the same thing. You're one of millions, probably billions of websites, but the difference is the source of traffic. So that's the main differentiator. Now, I think everybody, as their business grows, should have both. On my Etsy shop, I have things that or for sale on my Etsy shop are things that I can remake. So like I make these little quote bracelets or earrings, things that aren't necessarily one of a kind, because I don't put as much of my efforts into there. And I'm using that more as, oh, someone found me on Etsy because, I have thousands of reviews and thousands of sales and it's a well-established shop. So that's almost like social proof for me to get them to come over to my website. And that's the other thing, addressing whether or not people will come and trust you to buy from your website. And, do they feel good about that? Social proof is critical, meaning, when you want to find out about a business, if you see someone that you think is really cool and you love their stuff and you want to know more about them, like the first thing you do is go to try to find them on Facebook or Instagram. And if there's not a Facebook or Instagram presence, it kind of gives you that like, oh, what's going on here? Like my grandma's on Facebook. Why isn't this person on Facebook? So you want to make sure that when you are venturing out into selling online, that you're providing and you're creating opportunities to have the social proof that's necessary to make someone comfortable enough to shop with you.
Oh my gosh, so much just amazing information that you're sharing right now. It's why, this is why I wanted to talk to you also about your coaching, because you have an immense amount of knowledge. Like you have been doing this now for what, like 10, 11 years?
11 years. So? Yeah.
And you've been in it, you've been successful. I always think of, I tell people that Etsy is kind of like a video game almost. Like you got to figure out the cheat codes to get to the next level. And I feel like you've beat the big boss and you're at the top of selling on Etsy. That was a really nerdy reference.
Do you know what goes great with listening to podcasts? If you said a warm drink, you're absolutely right. Just imagine you're sitting back, you're listening to your favorite podcast, all while holding a nice, cute ass mug in your hand with your favorite hot beverage in it. If you're wondering, where can I get a mug like that? Well, you're in luck. You can swing by the Coots Creations Cute Coffee and Tea Mugs Etsy shop. They've got everything from enamel coffee cups to travel mugs, all featuring adorable original artwork. Head over to etsy.com/shop/Coots Creations and use promo code WANDER for 10% off any mug.
Part of what you've done, again, started with jewelry making, and in 2019, so just a couple of years ago, you started transitioning into helping other artists and crafters. And that was through Bloom, which focuses on helping fellow artists and kind of, teaching the ways to harness those relationships that they've built, whether in person or online, to really get their business out there and have a thriving business. So tell us a little bit more about Bloom. What was kind of the moment where you were you know what, I'm going to start teaching other people how to be successful?
Yeah, well, it had kind of, as most things, it had kind of been an idea that was forming in my head for a while. And how it came up, it's interesting. It kind of formed the same way my business formed, my jewelry business formed, was I was having success. And when you're at a show, artists, especially crafters and handmade sellers, and we're a weird bunch in that we talk numbers, we tell everybody how much we sell. I can't imagine. In my other life, I'm a speech and language pathologist. I specialize in early childhood language development. I would never tell someone how much I make. But it shows, that's how'd you do? What'd you do today? How much did you make today? And we share that it's nothing. And you can see when someone's booth is empty, when they've sold stuff. So it was very visible that I was selling, and that, you could see that I would have a long line, and people started asking me how I was doing that. And then people started asking me to coach them. And I said, no, because I don't have time. I don't have time to individually coach people. And the cost of that is prohibitive because, I know there can be some harsh feelings around this sometimes. Sometimes people get upset about people charging for coaching, but the fact of the matter is time is valuable. It's your most valuable resource. So I didn't have the time to be able to give, and I couldn't charge people what it would be worth and have them still be, like someone who's just starting out who needs that level of support isn't going to be able to afford it and shouldn't spend their money on that. So it was this weird catch-22, but I'm you know what? Yeah. I take online courses. I really like taking online courses. I have taken courses on everything from, art and craft techniques to Pinterest, to email, to Facebook ads, you name it, I'm learning about it. And there was not, and still currently is not, there was not a lot of stuff specifically for handmade sellers, lots of things for e-commerce, for product-based businesses, for boutique businesses. But like for the handmade space, there's just not a lot. Even like for Etsy, there's a lot of Etsy specific things.
Mm-hmm.
But really, when you start to think about, okay, like what exactly is it? How is it that I have this successful business? What is it about me? Because goodness knows I'm not the only jewelry seller in the world. I'm not the only vintage seller in the world. Like, what is it? And what it is the relationships that I formed with people. And when I thought about, okay, how can I teach that? Is that a thing? Is it a method? Like, how exactly did I do this? Yeah, it is a thing. My undergraduate degree is in marketing. So I have a knowledge of marketing and business and things like that. And then my master's degree is in speech and language pathology. So I also have an understanding of not only communicating, but understanding how people want to be communicated with, and understanding that what they say might not always be what they mean. And that intersection there is how you connect with someone. So I'm like, okay, I do have these skills and I do have this information. And yeah, I can offer something valuable to this community. And I can create a course so that I can help more people without having to get into one-on-one coaching that's just not going to be viable for anybody. So that was how I started. And I took a course to learn how to make courses. It was from Amy Porterfield. Her business is called Digital Course Academy. Yeah. I know, which is very meta.
No, I've done the same thing. So
yeah, so it's a course on making courses. Like you might have taken a course on making podcasts, and then you podcast about learning how to podcast. It all gets very existential. But so I took this course from Amy Porterfield, and I was launching in January 2020. That was going to be my first launch. It was my first launch. Built this course. The whole thing was pretty much what it is now, except a lot of it was, okay, like you build these relationships at shows and then you move that online, because that really was what I did. Now, like pandemic was not on the bingo card. I didn't see it coming. I didn't I had my January students come in, and that was just, when like whispers of something weird going on overseas was happening, but we didn't see anything, that wasn't going to affect us. Way far away, that's not here. So my first group of students came through. It was an amazing group of students. We all learned a lot. They learned about how to do their branding and how to create content and how to find their perfect customer and how to build their email list. And then March happened, and I had a group coming in April, and it was like, oh man, like no one's going to shows and building their email list. No one's going and meeting people. So now what do we do? And I kind of had to reevaluate, because, it's like, can you build an email list? Can you build a business just online? Can you do that without relying on going to shows? And it turns out the answer is yes, you can. It is different. I would say it is probably a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but for lack of a better term, it's probably a little bit easier to do things like building an email list when you're at a show, because there's something so valuable about interacting with someone in person. It's much easier when someone comes and buys from you to say, hey, you want to be on my VIP list? Like that barrier is just a little bit, the barriers are down. Online, however, you can still build those relationships. It just takes a little bit longer, and you have to be more intentional with it. So that's really the core of what I teach. And over the years now, right now I have my 6th group of students in. We're seeing like consistent positive results. And I'm I try to be very transparent and very real. This is not like, I'm not teaching you the secret of the universe here. I'm not saying like, take this course and you're going to learn how to sell. I'm not giving any sales secrets. Like that is not what this is about at all. This is about learning how to communicate and relate to your audience in an authentic way. And then the sales are almost an aside. Like it's almost like, oh, and people buy my stuff now, and that's really great. So that's the core of what I do. And it has worked for me, and it has worked now for 100+ students. And I love it.
With a business, trust is insanely important.
It is. Especially with a handmade business, because you're selling them something that you made. So they have to have a lot of faith in you that you made it well. I just did with my students a storytelling workshop on Tuesday, and we dug into mining our own personal stories and figuring out how we can use that as content. And it's funny because for me, that's something that's just so natural. But it's a real challenge, and it's a real exercise in figuring it out. But that's really what it comes down to, is just being able to create those connections. Because once you get an idea, like if you have those same 4 or 5 people that are coming at every show, like you need to study them and know everything about them. Where do they go? What do they do? How do they look at your stuff? How do they pick it up? What do they call it? Where do they carry it? Are they giving it as a gift? Like, you have to pay attention to all those things. And it's not things that they're things that when I say them, it's like, oh God, yeah, of course, that makes total sense. But it doesn't come naturally to everybody. So being observant and asking questions, being a listener is like point number one.
That is so important. Yeah. I might have to have you on for another episode because I think I could talk about like just the psychology, I guess, behind markets and like getting to know your customer for hours. What are maybe like one or two things that beginner makers can easily do?
Okay, so first things first, price your products so that you are making profit. Do not undercut yourself. Selling a thing that costs you $2 for $2.25 is not valuable. You are losing money. No one, like, unless you are independently wealthy, quit that now. So that's one. Two, if you have a business name, buy your domain name, put it on a business card and give it to everybody. People save cards. They do.
Yes.
I'm always surprised to see when people are like, oh, I don't give away cards. Spend the 2 cents on the card and give it away. It is well worth. 3, ask every single person that comes in your booth to join your email list. You can put out a piece of paper and ask them to write their name and email down. You can have a little notepad made up and name and email, and they can rip it off and put it in. Call it a VIP list, call it a membership, call it a club, call it whatever you want, but invite every single person that comes through your group to join, or it comes through your booth to join. Those are my top like 3 basics, because that's how you will get the bones of what you need to really start to build your business.
Those are 3 amazing tips, especially the price to make money. I feel like that's difficult to do, especially like if you have a little bit of like imposter syndrome. You're like, oh, yeah, I don't want to sell it for too much. Like, oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, I could do a whole thing on pricing. Like,
oh my Lord.
When I see someone post a picture of a product and they'll say, "What would you pay for this?" It's like, it does not matter. It doesn't matter what anyone paid for it. Like, I used an example of like, what would I pay for a Corvette? Nothing. I don't want a Corvette. I've got no interest in that. Does that mean it's not valuable? Absolutely not. It means I'm not the customer for that. They're not going to discount their price for me because I don't like it, because the problem isn't in the price. The problem is in that it's just not my product. So like makers who are undercutting their stuff or pricing on emotion, cut it out. Know your numbers, know your price, get yourself profit. One of the things, so I'm working on this little series of independent workshops because I do have the course. The course only opens a couple times a year, but I'm going to do like smaller, just kind of mini paid workshops. And one of them that I really I was going to do it and I thought, oh, nobody wants that, like mindset. Like I am going to do mindset for makers, because so many of us, for some reason, we're so afraid of pricing fairly and getting paid. And it's so funny because it's like, you're making this, you want to be in business. If you want to be in business, that means you want to make money. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money. Like if you are working at a job and you're not doing it to make money, then you're doing something wrong. That's called volunteering.
Yeah. No,
so if you're running
mindset
a
for makers.
Yes. If you're running a business and you're running it to make money, which you should be, we have to move through that. Like, you are worth it. Your time is worth it. Your product is worth it. That's what I'm doing. Mindset for makers. Cause I get so sad when I see that.
That's a big one. Like that's one that is definitely needed. So not only are you working on mindset for makers, but is there anything else that you're kind of currently working on that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah. So I will be having, by the time this comes out, I have a freebie that is called Content Idea for Creatives. And it is a free PDF download that you can grab. And after that, whenever you sign up for that, you will get an invitation to a mini course that I have called Clear Cut Canva. Canva is a digital graphic design tool that has a free and paid version online. If you know what it is, then you probably love it. If you don't know what it is and you're wondering, how do people get such beautiful graphics on Instagram or on their website? The answer is most likely Canva. So the Clear Cut Canva course walks you through the basics of how to use Canva, the layouts, how to create your brand kit, how to create content for social media, website banners, basically just kind of the nitty gritty of how to use all of those tools.
Yeah, Canva is amazing. Like it is so good. I think everyone should use Canva.
Yeah. When you get into it, the stuff that you can do, I mean, it's the difference between having like a meh website and a, wow, that's really pro. I can't believe she hired someone to do her website.
Yeah, no, I love Canva and yeah, I recommend it to everyone I meet. And I do a little Canva coaching on the side as well. And so I'm like, anytime anyone's like, yeah, there's a Canva course, I'm like, yes, get it out there. Everyone should be using this.
Yeah, this is going to be, like I said, just the basics of, going down the sidebar and across the toolbar and knowing how to use it. Cause that's the hardest part is figuring out what does what. And then I also show you like what to ignore. Like we don't need all the things in Canva. We only need some of the things in Canva.
God, I could get lost. Oh yeah. Canva. I get lost in Canva for hours. I love it so much. So we have Mindset for Makers. You've got your freebie coming out as well as your Canva course. Where can folks keep track of all this? Where can we find you, like on social media or website or?
Yeah. So on social media, I am at Bloom by Belle Monili in all of the places. My website is bloombybellemonili.com. If you want to, I think when this comes out, you'll have a link to the freebie on the website. So once you sign up for the freebie, you will be on my email list and you will get invitations when the mini course opens. And then my flagship course, Get Online, Grow Online, will open for enrollment in January 22. So anybody who thinks this is awesome and needs help and comes through their holiday sales season going, yeah, 2022 is when I'm going to move online, think of me in January. You'll hear about it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining me today, Lucy. I could literally, like I said, I might have to have you on again because I could just pick your brain forever and love just listening to you break down everything about kind of like, again, I feel like it's a little bit of like the psychology of like being a maker and connecting with people. And I'm fascinated by that. I think it's so interesting and you have such amazing tips. So I can't thank you enough for being on today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to share. I could talk about this forever.
As Lucy said, you can find her on social media at Bloom by Belle Monili across social media, including Facebook. And she's got a bunch of wonderful stuff coming up. I will, of course, link to all of that on the podcast description and on our social media. So be sure to check that out and be sure to follow along with Lucy and everything that she's got coming out. Because it's, again, if you're a maker, thinking about being a maker, maybe you're in it for a while and you're looking to revamp, you've got insane resources available for everyone. So highly recommend checking out Bloom for sure. So thanks again, Lucy, so much for being on.
Thank you, Allie. I appreciate you having me.
And I'd like to also thank the listeners for tuning in today. Be sure to like, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're consuming your podcasts from. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, you can text or call us on our hotline at 252-419-6004, and we will include them on a future episode of the podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at wandering_creative_, and also check out our website, cootscreations.com.
This has been a Coots Creations production. Follow the show on Instagram at wandering_creative_ and on Twitter at wandering_pod. For more information, go to cootscreations.com. Like, rate, review, and subscribe. To sponsor the Wandering Creatives podcast, visit www.cootscreations.com/podcast-sponsorship-opportunities. You can also click the link in the episode description below. To be a guest or a featured maker on the podcast, click the link in our Instagram bio or contact us at cootscreationsllc@gmail.com.